Well, the two viewers that I have, by the way, they're not my father and mother, who are deceased, have emboldened me to embark upon a new series, God willing. It's not going to be just one, of these segments. I think 20 minutes, maybe longer sometimes. I'm not sure. I'm going to play it by ear, which I will entitle Introduction to Catholic Christianity. Um, Catholicism and Christianity are basically the same, but I want to make clear that I am a Catholic, uh, a believing, practicing Catholic. Uh, there is no dogma of the Catholic Church which I deny. There may be some that I think are problematic. Papal infallibility has to be understood and perhaps accepted in some, way. But I am a Catholic, and I have studied in non-Catholic settings, but mostly Catholic settings. And in this first program, I wanted to introduce myself a little bit as far as my experience and qualifications, my intent, my approach, some basics, and things like that. So I was born in Cuba, a Catholic country. My mother was I think, a God-fearing woman with great devotion to St. John Bosco, who is basically the patron of children or raising children. He ran orphanages and schools for the poorest kids in Turin, North Italy. My mother was very devoted to him, and I picked that up by osmosis. And my father was a humble man, not a great, believer, and perhaps sharing some of the Cuban anti-clericalism that also derives from Spain, sort of distrust of priests. And most priests in Cuba were Spanish anyway. They were expelled by Castro mostly. But at the age of 4, I had what I call an experience of the numinous. I later wrote a paper on that at Harvard Divinity School in a course with Richard Niebuhr, I guess the nephew of one of the Niebuhr brothers, Reinhold, and then another Richard Niebuhr. The, something called something like religious experience or something like that. And I wrote about being with my mother, remembering this very old, one of the oldest memories. I may have been 4 or 5, I don't know, maybe 3, I don't know, probably 4. Wandering with my mother, or actually, I was with my mother in probably a convent of nuns or a church of some sort, and I wandered off by myself into the sacristy, and I saw one of these life-size, bloody crucifixes of Christ with, the grayish, rigor mortis and the nails, and just very realistic. And I experienced what I later would read in Rudolf Otto, the Mysterium Tremendum et Fascinans, a mystery, a non-understood thing that is both tremendous, makes you tremble in a way, but fascinates you. So it doesn't repel you, but it um, fixes you there with some religious awe, which is a very biblical concept. And so I remember being impressed by that. And then I'm not going to tell you my whole story or anything, but later on in Miami, when we moved to Miami after a couple of years of the Castro Revolution, and things were getting unpleasant for many people. When my parents fought, etc., I would pray, probably the rosary. And I found solace in that. And I actually made some sort of a vow or promise to God that I knew that I would abandon him, but that I prayed that he would bring me back at the age of 18. I think I was 12 when I said that. So it's kind of unusual. So, yes, by the time I was 15, I was kind of an atheist debating with a friend, my friend's mother on the beach, and with priests even, about the theodicy issue. How can all good God allow evil? Either he's not all good and kind of allows it or likes evil, or he's powerless to prevent evil. That's the great theodicy issue. Theodicy meaning the attempt to justify God, to explain that God is just and all powerful. So, in fact, and I like to be honest, after certain LSD trips and things, many of them bummers and many of them with religious experiences, Garden of Eden crucifixion experiences, hell, hell and purgatory experiences, very heavy LSD trips. I had one last one in June or July of 1972, where I thought I saw the heavenly host or something on the corrugated roof of my room. I was, 19, not 18. So God was 1 year late. And I said no more. And in fact, I had a missal that my mother had given me, or I had taken from her when she got a new one, which I still have. And for some reason, I opened up that missal, daily mass readings and all that. And in those days, both in Latin and Spanish. And I saw my name neatly written on the, inside cover. And it sort of literally gave me, in retrospect, the feeling that my name was written in the book somehow, that I sort of belonged or was in a safe area. And so I said no more of this. And I had a religious conversion. I went to a spiritual director, a very famous Spanish Franciscan preacher in Miami. And he guided me into the Dominican order, or validated my vocation. I went to Mexico to study to be a Dominican, and there I discovered the world, so to speak. I met very learned friars who had studied in great places, especially Les Olchois, the great Dominican school of theology, banned at one time, but which ended up contributing the most theologians to Vatican II of any one place. Yves Congar and men like that. I'm reading a illustrated history of French literature, and today my turn was to read on Lacordaire, the great French Dominican preacher who restored the order in France in the 19th century. I heard about him in 1973 in Mexico. He became a hero. He was legendary in the order in Mexico. The Mexican order was very French oriented. The provincial was French, and the provincial had been prior of Congar, Congar's superior. I think at Couvent Saint-Jacques or some other place, Father Desaubry, Augustin Desaubry, his brother, I think Dominique Desaubry, was an anthropologist out in Chiapas. But Father Desaubry is actually mentioned in Congar's diary of the years when he was silenced from 50, in the 40s and 50s. I later had the privilege of meeting Yves Congar at Couvent Saint-Jacques. I went to Mass there and somehow got invited to lunch by Père Joshua, who was the thesis director of my prior in Mexico, Miguel Concha Malo. He's still around and a beautiful man. And I was invited to lunch and I sat at a table with Yves Congar, 1981, May. He was in crutches by then. So my formation is very Dominican of this type. Unfortunately, the church is divided. And we have, the Dominicans were inquisitors at one point. Torquemada sent people to the stake. Then you have on the opposite end Bartolomé de las Casas defending the natives in Mexico. Aquinas was avant-garde in his day. He adopted Greek Aristotelian philosophy, considered atheistic and materialistic, as opposed to Platonic philosophy, which was idealistic. He was condemned by certain, and I, of course, know the history of the order. The founder of Catholic Biblical Studies, Marie Joseph Lagrange, was silenced, told to not teach Old Testament. He switched to New. Then he was told not to teach New Testament, and he had to stop. He was obedient. And he died under the cloud of doubt as to his orthodoxy, 1938. 5 years before, Pope Pius XII, no liberal, but a learned man, published the famous encyclical, 1943, Divino Afflante Spiritu, the divine spirit that blows, something like that. And basically, he was justifying all the modern biblical methods of study that had been the cause of Lagrange's being silenced. He died 5 years too late or early. So that, and then 50 years later, the Catholic Church, through its Pontifical Biblical Commission, under the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, at that time, Ratzinger, became Pope Benedict XVI. Under the urging of my professor, Albert Vanois, at the Biblicum in Rome, Pontifical Biblical Institute in Rome, Father Vanois, later Cardinal, was secretary of the commission. He urged, as a Jesuit, that the Dominican Mary Joseph Lagrange, they were rivals, and the Jesuits caused a lot of problems for the school that Lagrange founded, the famous École Biblique et Archéologique de Française in Jerusalem, in the site of the Martyr of St. Stephen's. I stayed there. Father Vanois said we must rehabilitate Lagrange by name. And so there's a line there in that 1993 document, The Interpretation of the Bible in the Church. You can easily Google and find that for free on the Vatican site and elsewhere. Saying even though they did not get the encouragement they now receive, men like Père Lagrange, and he mentioned, I think, Origen and some other giants. So they put Lagrange in a list of great early biblical scholars. And that way, many years later, they build a tomb, in a way, to these persecuted prophets, if you will. It happens in the church, and I'm doing this by way of introduction to what I'm going to be doing. It won't be everybody's cup of tea, unfortunately. I've actually taught Bible class at a local parish in English, and I had a good, 8, 9, sometimes 10 or more devoted uh, attendees. I don't want to call them students, but yes, we had a nice little group. And I had at least one guy there that was there sort of reluctantly, or, he was interested in what I had to say, but he was incredibly doubtful about whether this was orthodox, because people are bombarded with these sites, websites that I don't even look. When I see some of them, I'm shocked. I don't even go there. But I understand that the poison and, I want to be blunt, crap that unsuspecting minds, inquiring minds, literally of the National Enquirer type level, they're bombarded with stuff that's incredible, and they don't like this Pope. And I think the Pope is a reader of, and meditator of the and practice uh, person that practices the gospel without, sine glossa, Saint Francis would say, without commentaries, trying to twist everything around and make it more palatable. So that I come from this solid Dominican tradition. I imbibed it. Congar had a famous line, I am ontologically Dominican. Unfortunately, I didn't stay in the order for reasons that I don't want to get into, personal family tragedies and things of youth and things that were very painful and disorienting for many, many years. But nevertheless, I was trained as a Dominican, and I think as a Dominican. And today, reading about Lacordaire, openness to the world, just like Aquinas, openness to science, not having a confident faith where you're not afraid of facts and science that could make crumble your weak faith. It's the same thing Paul had in Romans and in the other communities, the weak and the strong, the squeamish, the people that are not mature in faith. They think you can't eat certain foods or stuff like that. And he says, we, the strong, should accommodate the weak. But I think that accommodating the least of our brethren, if you will, intellectually or religiously, does not prohibit saying the truth, even hard truths. Such as, for example, when Jesus in John 6 talks about eating his flesh and drinking his blood, many people left, and he even challenged the disciples, do you too want to leave? So uh, I'm quite, you know, at ease with all that. So basically, I studied in Mexico. I left Mexico. I got my BA in philosophy at Florida State. I went to Catholic University for a semester in the honors philosophy program, the Basel Scholars Program. Then I left in this crisis just after the death of my father, which followed quite soon after the death of my mother. I was the oldest. I was only 20, 21 or 22, and then had a little 10-year-old brother. It was very painful. I then went to Harvard Law School, which I hated, but I switched over to courses that I liked, especially medieval stuff and even divinity school courses. And I graduated. I tried going back to Mexico. That didn't work. Tried being a lawyer. That didn't work. Went to Harvard Divinity School and had a great time, but that was not a Catholic school. And I was not into Bible at the time. So after a year, when I saw the new budget, I had a full scholarship and all that, but I had to take a student loan to live. When I saw the budget and all that, I quit again. Went back to trying to be a lawyer, which I hated. And finally, under the inspiration of a dear friend, Muse, I went to Rome with my own money and got my license in sacred theology, specializing in biblical theology at the Pontifical Gregorian University in 1998. And then I went to the Angelicum, or the Pontifical University of St. Thomas, in the city, in Urbe, and I got my doctorate there, writing it in 1 year very quickly. It was published by the Edwin Mellen Press under the title The Theological Significance of Jesus' Temple Action in Mark's Gospel. And I defended that thesis into the year 2000. And by then I was teaching in the Catholic Regional Seminary for Florida, which I stayed in for 14 years teaching sacred scripture, both testaments and even Christian origins. And I even had a seminar on Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls and all that. Very interested in Judaism. And I was chair, I think the only lay person chair of a committee, probably, even counting nuns, on ecumenism and interreligious dialogue. So I'm all into Judaism and Christian-Jewish relations, and with Lutherans and many Protestants, and the only ones that really didn't want to come were the Greek Orthodox. So those grudges remain, which is quite sad. Today's another great day. It's the day of two great Greek fathers of the church, Saint Basil, basically the founder of Eastern monasticism, comparable to Saint Benedict in the West. I think Saint Benedict was inspired by Basil. And then Basil's friend Gregory Nyazansen, who was known as the theologian. So I think this is a propitious day to begin this humble series, which I don't know, how many sessions it'll be. I did 60 on the Gospel of Mark, so this one will be longer and maybe more leisurely, or maybe the programs will be. I'm at 22 minutes already. I don't know how long I want to make them. Not 50 minutes, I don't think, like I've done some. So I have a personal faith in Jesus, and so an introduction to Christianity by a Catholic, or even from a Catholic perspective, and almost Catholic with a small c, universal kind of broad perspective. I want to include here many things. I want to share what I, nearing 70 years of age, have learned in so many places, and whether it's one person or 10 that listens to this eventually, I enjoy and I benefit from giving this out or sharing this. An introduction in Latin, if I'm not mistaken, is to lead somebody into something. It's not like Christianity for Dummies or for beginners. It's basically my way of introducing whoever it is to my understanding of Christianity from a very broad perspective, because among my interests, and I started out, I think, with the Dominicans with this interest, is anthropology and theological anthropology, meaning the human person, how we operate. And so I'm into psychology and even Freudian psychoanalytic theory. I've read a lot of Freud, and I do believe in this hard science stuff that, kind of like Aristotle and Aquinas, sounds very materialistic and atheistic. People might say, a Dominican once told me, don't forget your Jung, don't forget your Jung. I've never studied much of Jung. I kind of, archetypes and all this kind of stuff, that's fine. But I like the theory of the unconscious by Freud, and I like the theory of many other things in Freud. And I do think we can certainly reconcile it, as we can evolution, for example, with the Christian Orthodox faith. When I was at Florida State, I was in a big auditorium with a highfalutin biology professor. He was very popular and talked about all kinds of stuff. I mean, his testosterone level or whatever, it wasn't really that. But he poo-pooed religion in a ridiculous way. And I said, this man knows nothing. He knows nothing about what Teilhard de Chardin and other great Christian Catholic priests, Jesuits were saying about evolution. They were actually doing the excavating. This guy has a Mickey Mouse Reader's Digest comic book knowledge of what Christianity is. And then one day, Robert Spivey substituted. He was, I think, the prevost. That's what they call it, or provost, prevost. And he started talking. I said, this guy knows what he's talking about. Well, I learned he had actually published some stuff, I think, and maybe a lot on religion. And he was the one I went to get a recommendation for Harvard Law School. And I said, I sat in this biology class with this other professor talking nonsense about religion. He knew nothing, nothing. I don't mind somebody that knows and criticizes, but somebody that's totally ignorant, they're just blabbing. So he cracked a little smile. He goes, I'll recommend you. So that's a little story on where I'm coming from. So that I wanted to get into a couple of basics, as I call it, to not make this too long. On my website, I do have in Spanish something I wrote when I tried another religious order, the Descalced Carmelites, in 1992 in the Dominican Republic and then Spain. Just arrived at the Dominican Republic, I wrote something called The Christian Faith in Spanish. And it's kind of like what I am going to try to do now, except that was 28 years ago, a long time ago. And I also have on my website, Emilio Chavez, Bible Explainer. If you Google that, you'll probably get it easily. God and Essay. So I speak about many of the same things as here. Did we invent God? How has God worked for us throughout history as a concept? I had a professor at Harvard, famous, Kaufman, constructing the concept of God. Gordon Kaufman was, I think he's probably dead, a Mennonite, become quite a, I don't know what you would call it, rationalistic Christian, saying, forget about revelation and forget about, the Bible taken literally. We need the concept of God to relativize everything that's human. We must build a concept of God that is compatible with freedom, equality, respect for everyone, not imposing your own revealed faith as the only true one, etc. So we can explore how people have been inspired by God or the gods or whatever throughout history to some extent, and approach the God issue that way. So I'm going to be rather rationalistic to some extent. It'll be faith seeking understanding, and which is theology. And as we seek to understand, we have to explore sociology, anthropology, psychology, all that stuff. All that is knowledge that God has provided to us. Then the question of theodicy. I even forgot what I wrote. Nature and activity of God. So I have a little paper on how God acts in history, etc., which is really a question of faith discernment. So I'll say right off the bat, there are no proofs per se as such for the existence of God, or much less for the divinity of Jesus Christ. Faith is very important, and I'm reading about Kierkegaard, Søren Kierkegaard at night, and I'm reading about that and the paradox and stuff like that. I'm just dropping some names here, but it'll sort of all be combined in some way. Personal experience, and then chapter 6, the option of faith and prayer. Chapter 7, is there a true religion? And there I get into the biblical concept of truth, emet, basically the Old Testament, as something we can rely on. So it's quite related to, does God work for me, and what kind of God works for me, and how does that then reflect on the reality that is outside of me? Because I don't believe we construct our concept of God. I told you I'm a believing Catholic who does not deny any dogma, even dogmas that are problematic, the perpetual virginity of Mary. I do what we do with regular things in the faith. It's called the obsequium fidei. I offer the gift of my submissive belief. I don't need to be proved everything. Just like Job. Job wants to sue God and can't find the process server that can find him, etc. And at the end, God just manifests himself mysteriously and asks all these questions. And Job actually converts when he prays for his friends, and admits it was way above his pay grade to figure everything out. So I think that's essential in religion. And then the unanswered silence of God. And like I said, I wrote this when I was unemployed in 2013, and I've forgotten a lot of it. I learned in Mexico. I went to a Jesuit university with the other Dominican students, and I had a great professor who loved the Dominicans, a Jesuit called Francisco Migoya, and he taught a course called Theory of Religion. And in that course, I studied in some depth 3 religions instead of one. So I was a real fanatic. I studied Hinduism, Buddhism, and Islam. I actually wrote a paper on all 3, but the one on Islam is on my website in Spanish, some 17 or 18 pages, written 1975 or so. And what I got out of that class, among other things, from Professor Migoya, who's a great, beautiful scholar, man, gentle Jesuit. He followed a guy that I know may be discredited or surpassed or something. By the way, I've also studied Clifford Geertz in the Niebuhr course. So I've studied a lot of people thinking about religion, Peter Berger and all that stuff. But what I remember from Migoya, and I've always thought about it, is 3 levels of relation of the human to the divine or the deities, etc. And the most basic level is the taboo level, where primitive man, fears the divinity, fears that the divinity is angry and can punish, etc., send a storm or something. So he appeases the divinity. It's a human instinct. We're wired that way. I've studied the Cheyenne Indians in a paper for Harvard Law School, American Indian Law. I went for the, more native stuff rather than, contemporary legalities. And people, and the Aztecs, humans have the tendency, the Canaanites did, offer your firstborn, cut yourself, all these things, so that you offer a sacrifice to the deity and you appease the deity. Freud has theories on that and all that stuff about father complex and all that. A superior, a next level is, if the deity can be appeased when he's angry, how about bribing him when he's not angry to get some favor out of him, which is called magic in the van der Leeuw system. And I do think that for many people, religion is a form of magic. You pray to God, you even make a vow, or you offer something trying to get a favor. You don't really obey God. You might pretend to be on his good side, like flattering God. magic. It's not illusionistic of these guys that get rabbits out of a hat. Magic is really the intent to affect reality with some ritual or some incantation or something. I've also studied magic to some extent, never practiced it. Aleister Crowley and Israel Regardie and all these other people. So that the religious level, religio in Latin, would be to sort of bind yourself to God or to really relate with God, connect, involves recognizing God as the deity that you obey. He's not at your service to get you a parking space or, even when you're sick, to help you. You ask for healing and things like that, but thy will be done. Jesus' prayer in Gethsemane is thy will be done. I don't want to go through this. If possible, let this cup be removed from me. Now, some scholars, and I was thinking about this last night as I was preparing in my own mind for this, because this is kind of informal. I don't do particular research. I might write down a couple of things. Sometimes I might do some, or I might look something up the next time when I misspoke or made a mistake or forgot something the prior time. But last night I was thinking, well, some people say Christianity is not a religion. They'll say something like a commonplace, it's a way of life, it's not a religion. Well, and Karl Barth, I took a course on Barton Tillich at Episcopal Divinity School in Cambridge when I was in the Harvard or Weston School of Theology days. I also went to Weston Jesuit School of Theology for a semester. It's now part of Boston College. Had some great teachers there. Barth would say religion is man's attempt to reach God, sort of based on Romans, his great commentary on the Romans, Israel tried with its own righteousness to be in good standing with God, and God is the opposite. He justifies the sinner, Romans 3:25-26. This is what I have to say to get sort of wrapping this up a little bit. I think that Christianity is definitely based on the notion that God communicated with the people of Israel over a long period. He communicated through prophets who were reading historical events or through certain events that were interpreted a certain way. They became the scriptures we know as the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament. I want to get into the origins of Israel, and some of my stuff is old stuff, like The God of the Fathers by Albrecht Alt, which I read in Mexico, but it's remained with me. These nomads without statues, etc. Not sedentary yet. And James Barr, I think, writes about this. God is known for acts of righteousness or victory, because this tzedakah word in Hebrew is really salvation in many ways. It's being declared innocent in a trial originally, instead of rasha or wicked. And what Barr says, and I say this at the end of my intro to the Bible notes, various notes for various biblical courses, is that in Jesus, God went all the way. In Jesus, God did one last incredible act of righteousness by entering our own world, being incarnate in Jesus of Nazareth, and suffering everything that we suffer. In effect, undoing Adam's sin, the sin of our forefathers, and the sin that we all commit, is wanting to be God. When we practice this magic, we're in charge. I'm in charge of my bank account. I'm in charge of all my stuff. God is, if he can help me, great. If not, I'll put him aside for a while there. God got involved in a way so as to show us the opposite tack of Adam reaching to be like God for that fruit. Philippians 2 says, Jesus, though he was in the form of God, did not deem divinity something to snatch, almost like the snatching of that fruit. But he humbled himself, became human, not only human, but a slave category of human. Not only a slave category of human, but death on a cross, the most ignominious, insulting penalty for low class people in the Roman Empire. Total opposite of Adam in a triple abasement, a triple humbling, which of course results in a triple exaltation. Every knee shall bow in the heavens, in the earth, and under the earth, like the triple exaltation of the servant in Isaiah 52:13. He shall be very high, Ram, like Abraham. The Father is exalted. He shall be lifted up. It's a very interesting Hebrew verb, and highly, exalted or high. And so that is the basis of the Christian faith. And I think you can find that in the parable of the murderous vine dressers. The owner of the vineyard, basically Israel, sends his servants, the prophets, regularly to collect fruit, etc., like in Isaiah 5, on which this parable is based, in Mark 12, for example. And they beat these servants, and this crazy God says, oh, they've beaten all my servants. Maybe I'll just send my beloved son now, and they'll respect him. I mean, a naive guy. Of course, they kill the servant who's the heir. So God is this sower that sows everywhere, even where it's not going to grow. This is, in Hebrew, this is the chesed idea. I think chesed in the Old Testament is unexpected acts of kindness such that they cause unbelief. When David sends his men to mourn the king of Moab, I think it is, they don't believe it because they're enemies, and they cut these guys' beards and their tunics so that they can't go around with, kind of showing half their butt or something. The vine owner who pays everyone the same, whether they work 8 hours or one. And then the father of the so-called prodigal son. He's an Oriental patriarch. He's looking out the window and he runs out to this guy that just spent his inheritance even before his father was dead. God is the God of Chesed and Emet. That's what Exodus 34, the Moses, when he sees God, is. Unexpected, surprising, out of the blue acts of salvation kindness. And he can be relied upon, Emet, to always do these surprises. It's a paradox. You can always count on God doing what you never counted on, the unexpected. So I think that the difference in the Christian religion is this total opposite God that empties himself. This is Philippians. This kenosis word is to empty like a liquid. Exactly what the servant also does in Isaiah. He emptied his soul, his nephesh, if I remember correctly. He poured himself unto death, some of the translations say. So that this is, I think, unique in Christianity. Besides the fact that historically Jesus was crucified. Whoever denies that is in La La Land. There's a lot of people in La La Land, but Hello, far away, just like the patriarchs in Hebrews 11. Um, Crucified under Pontius Pilate, for sure. A failure, abandoned. And then, of course, the resurrection is what his disciples believed fervently and convinced of happened. And so that's the essence of the Christian faith. How we got there, in a way, we want to discuss. This may not be a long series, but nevertheless, I thought I would cover what I've covered today with some other adventures, because I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to say next time, but hopefully it'll be from a reservoir that uh, has been filling and emptying and filling for many years, and I think it's worth something to some people. So I'll stop there, and we'll continue, hopefully, God willing, next time.